Ukrainian drone operators have demonstrated effective tactics against Russian assault troops near Ulakly in eastern Ukraine, south of Pokrovsk, tracking motorcycle units to their hideout before coordinating devastating artillery strikes and drone attacks, Forbes reports. This comes as US President Donald Trump halted aid to Ukraine and suspended intelligence sharing with Kiev following a contentious Oval Office press conference on the 6th of March. During the meeting, Trump and Vice President JD Vance accused Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy of lacking sufficient gratitude for US support. Meanwhile, Russia gradually advanced in Donetsk and Kursk oblasts. According to Forbes, operators from the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces 413th Separate Battalion spotted movement in a tree line outside Ulakly. The movement turned out to be Russian troops and motorcyclists speeding along a dirt road, the combat footage showed. The enemy is leading us to one of their shelters, the battalion stated in a video montage shared by the military. After losing over 15,000 armoured vehicles in Ukraine, Russian forces are increasingly deploying troops on motorcycles. These motorcycle units often spearhead assaults, securing positions for advancing forces, including tanks and other armoured vehicles. Recognizing the vulnerability of these advance units, the 413th Separate Battalion moved quickly to eliminate the growing Russian position outside Ulakly. After pinpointing the Russians' dugout, the battalion deployed explosive first-person view FPV drones that blasted uncamouflaged motorcycles while artillery units bombarded exposed troops. A second wave of FPV drones then maneuvered into the dugout itself. The bunker, along with its personnel, has been destroyed, the 413th Separate Battalion reported. Forbes notes that the successful operation reflects broader patterns in the conflict. While Russians continue advancing west of Ulakly after their 39th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade captured the town in mid-February, elsewhere their gains are slowing significantly. The successful Ukrainian operation is indicative of wider trends. The Russians are still advancing west of Ulakly after their 39th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade captured the town in mid-February, but elsewhere, Russian gains are slowing. In some sectors, the Russians are actually retreating as Ukraine concentrates forces for local counterattacks. Around the fortress city of Pokrovsk, a key Ukrainian stronghold in eastern Ukraine, Russian assaults are down 80% compared to their recent peak in mid-January, according to Ukrainian analysis group Deep State. The Ukrainian brigades in the city have begun pushing back. It's possible Russian regiments are exhausted after more than a year of relentless offensive operations that have cost them 1,000 or more casualties a day on the worst days, and also depleted their stocks of armoured vehicles. In that sense, US President Donald Trump's timing couldn't be worse for Ukraine, or better for Russia. Four people from the entourage of US President Donald Trump held secret talks in Kiev with some of the main political opponents of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Politico reports, citing 3 Ukrainian MPs and an American foreign policy expert. According to the publication's sources, senior Trump associates held talks with opposition leader Yulia Tymoshenko and senior members of Petro Poroshenko's party to discuss whether Ukraine can quickly hold presidential elections which have been postponed due to martial law still in effect in Ukraine. Politico reminds us that the official position of the US administration is that Trump does not interfere in the internal politics of Ukraine. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick denied his boss was weighing into Ukrainian politics, adding all that Trump wants is a partner for peace. But the behavior of Trump and his officials suggest quite the opposite. Trump has accused Zelensky of being a dictator without elections, while Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard has falsely accused Kiev of cancelling the election. The publication writes that the key to all the plans being discussed through unofficial channels is holding presidential elections in Ukraine after an agreement on a temporary ceasefire is reached, but before full-scale peace talks begin. The newspaper notes that Trump aides are confident that Zelensky will lose all votes due to conflict fatigue and public frustration over corruption. His poll ratings have been declining for years, though they have risen since last week's Oval Office scandal. But while the Trump camp may hope an election will sink Zelensky, he is still massively more popular than Tymoshenko or Poroshenko. In a poll conducted by British pollster Survation this week after the blow-up at the White House, 44% said they would back Zelensky for the presidency. His nearest rival, trailing him by more than 20 percentage points, is Valery Zaluzny, a former army commander who is now Ukraine's ambassador to Britain. Only 10% backed Poroshenko, who is known as the Chocolate King due to his confectionery empire. Tymoshenko garnered just 5.7% support. The key to all the plans under discussion via back channels is to hold presidential elections after a temporary ceasefire is agreed, but before full-scale peace negotiations get underway in earnest. The idea of an early presidential election is also being pushed by the Kremlin, which has wanted to be rid of Zelensky for years. Both Tymoshenko and Poroshenko have publicly opposed holding elections before the fighting ends, as has Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko. Nonetheless, Poroshenko's people and Yulia, they're all talking to Trump world, positioning themselves as people who would be easier to work with and people who would consent to many of the things that Zelensky is not agreeing to, a top Republican foreign policy expert told Politico, asking that his name be withheld so he could speak freely